from NHCSR here. I am currently trialing an attempt at stale seedbed technique using tarping to kill my weed seeds that are coming out of a recently tilled bed at my research plots. I recently got some advice from Crystal Stewart Courtens, who is a vegetable specialist at Cornell Cooperative Extension. She is also a farmer. She also does some trial research. So she knows a thing or two about practical research and giving good advice to dummies like me. So tarps can be a really important tool for what I'm trying to do, which is smothering weeds that are germinating from tilled land. But tarps can also be a very important tool used by people who are terminating cover crops in small-scale operations that don't want to use herbicide or are having a hard time getting their crimping and their rolling just right to kill those cover crops when they're ready to plant after protecting that soil over winter or some other period of time. I will also add that it sounds like tarps can be a very accessible baby step into no-till approaches for those of you who aren't quite there on cover cropping for no-till approaches. Sometimes finding the right way to fit these cover crops into your system can be a little tricky from a timing point of view. You know, getting the right time to plant, the right time to terminate. There's all sorts of things having to do with nitrogen being tied up that we kind of don't understand. It might be a little daunting for those of you who are used to traditional tillage methods, but aren't quite ready to go for a full cover crop. Try tarping. It's something that you can lay on fields over winter to keep that spot weed free for a period of time until you're ready to plant in the spring. Why not try it? I had a robot generate this infographic using some information from Cornell Cooperative Extension and some of Crystal's work. I had never heard the word occultation used in this context before, so I wonder where the robot even got that. I guess it just means light blocking. Other than that, I have fact-checked this, and I like it very much, including the pros and cons of using these different approaches, but every farm is different, and the devil is in the details. So Crystal has some very nice advice for me in my situation where I am tilling, but she also had shared several really interesting observations from her trial research. They were trialing a couple different approaches for a cabbage system and a squash system. Naturally, they walked away from this project with more questions than they had answers, but that is the nature of research after all. So listen in and you might find something helpful.
I'm a regional vegetable specialist with Cornell Cooperative Extension. I work in 17 counties from the Canadian border down to Orange County in eastern New York. And I focus on organic systems research, but I also work with a broad swath of growers. Whoever needs help in my immediate area, which is the 4 to 5 counties around me, I am at their beck and call. So today I just happened to take a deep dive into begonia diseases, as you do on occasion for a vegetable farmer who also does bedding plants. So it spans the gamut. I do a lot of beginning farmer work, so trying to be tech savvy, and then I also work with plain communities, so the complete polar opposite as far as computer technology, but lots of other cool kinds of technology. So yeah, it's a fun job.
That is so cool. I mean, the plain community, like that's what the Amish folks call themselves.
Oh yes,
plain community. So
yes.
I don't know. Is Amish a bad word? Like,
no,
is that no?
It just plain community encompasses Amish and Mennonite. So it's quicker, but now it's longer. I could have just said Amish and Mennonite.
Well, it's anytime you're talking about technology, like it's not like no technology. It's just like every community has their own set of rules about how technology should be adopted in their community and how it impacts their way of life. And for you, like it's probably the same information, like it's the same education, but it's just delivered in a million different ways, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Although there are cases where I can't make certain recommendations. A lot of farms can't use or choose not to use automatic roll-up sides on their tunnels, for example. So when you think about any form of automation, you have to really take a deep dive into what that looks like and whether or not it's going to be acceptable to that community. And I also work with a bunch of folks that primarily farm with horses. So just thinking about how equipment usage looks if horses are your engine, it can be fascinating and slightly challenging, but often completely adaptable.
Right. They'll always keep you busy, your
Yeah,
stakeholders.
no doubt, no doubt.
So you work with a lot of organic producers. So the practices that you were researching with tarping, was that specifically for organic, or is this for vegetable growers writ large?
Interestingly enough, this project was not targeted at vegetable growers. This was, and I had to go back and look at the funding source, this was a specialty crop block grant, but it was administered by the Farm Viability Institute. Okay. So that was fun. But it was really for all small scale growers. The limiting factor with tarping is really size, and how big a tarp can be and still be handleable. But I definitely work with conventional growers who are using tarps because there are no suitable herbicides for the crops that they want to grow, especially for direct seeded crops that can be really challenging to establish, things like carrots and beets. This is a great fit. So if you're at a size where tarps make sense, this is certainly equal opportunity, but far more organic growers are adopting this practice. I often just explain to people, think about how it is that plastic culture is working for you. The fact that we're asking people to lay plastic and then if they can wait a few weeks before they poke holes is essentially micro tarping. So then when you start to think about it in these terms, it's like, oh yeah, okay, we're doing that. Now I just have to pick up a silage tarp and move it around. Sounds like fun.
All right, well, tell me about the objectives of the project.
Yeah, so this project was designed to build on some of the work that's previously been done. We already know that tarps are good for weed control. So then the question is, can we expand the use of tarps into further no-till applications? So can we use them to effectively terminate different kinds of cover crops? And the larger question, which was really interesting, was how do tarps compare to cover crops for nitrogen retention over winter? So that was the other big piece of all of this. But then the piece that I found really interesting within all of that was the nuts and bolts of how things like compaction and moisture management affect the success of all of this. So we were certainly measuring our nitrogen availability in the soil based on these different applications, but we were also trying to be qualitative and just say, like, how hard is it to plant into this? Like, can we get a plant in the ground? Does the plant like it? So, what creatures are we seeing when we lift up the tarp, or when we till up the soil, or when we just have a cover crop? So there was a lot of qualitative, just observational data that we were pulling, farmer style. We're like, ooh, that doesn't look right. Or that's fantastic.
But that's exactly why field research is so necessary, right? It's not very sexy. It's not, fundamental research, but it's so important because these natural systems are too complicated to not try it in real life. Let's see. Let's start with compaction, right? So the whole point of pairing tarping with no-till or reduced-till approaches is that you can get the kind of weed control that you would normally get with tillage, but without messing with your soil. But at the same time, you're laying stuff on top of it, and there's a risk of compaction. Is that kind of what you were investigating?
Right. We also were concerned, especially with that overwintering aspect, which is not what you're looking at. But, with that, we thought that perhaps even just the snow cover and the continual, just the duration of having pressure might lead to surface compaction. What we discovered with the overwintering, which was super fascinating and just amazing, was that that little expansion that happens with freezing and thawing, especially in the spring when we're having more of those wild temperature fluctuations, puffs that soil up in a way that's really magical. That's a technical term, puffs it up. So if you are planting something very early, like we had two models in this case, we had a winter squash and we had cabbage. So with the cabbage, you're pulling that tarp off relatively early, mid-May, and the ground was phenomenal underneath, really friable. It was very easy to plant into, and the plants were super happy. It was just dreamy. We were all just like, oh, because this is research, and often we just can't mechanize things because of the small plot nature. So we were planting all of these little cabbages by hand, and you're just like, oh, this is so nice. This is really lovely. if you fast forward 1 month more and you get to the squash plantings in early June, or we didn't get to it until like mid-June, the ground was very compacted, like really difficult to work with. Wow. So we think that that fluffiness had subsided, and the rain of the spring had then actually created some surface compaction. So yeah, the ground, for whatever reason, again, probably a grad student should study this, get a puffometer and do 6 years of deep diving into this. But what we found in that case was that it was almost impossible to dig a nice little planting hole. So that was shocking. We didn't expect it to be that different. There's still that time capsule aspect. So the moisture underneath the tarp was the same in both scenarios, but the compaction was just so different in the two. So
that's really interesting. Well, that's very helpful, just knowing that. I know a lot of the growers in New Hampshire are using no-till and maybe even strip tillage for winter squash crops, and that's working out really well for them. I haven't seen anybody adopt cooler season like the brassicas, but like you have me kind of convinced that it's worth thinking about. That's cool.
Yeah, and I think that you can get away with doing either strip till or no till when you're planting from seed. This was just a qualitative, like an aha of, oh, look, the ground is really hard. I think the plant can handle it. Plants are tough. It's really just more of that understanding of, oh, wow, this is a factor. This is real. So that was very, very interesting. The moisture stuff is really interesting too, because, I mentioned to you that we also use tarps on our farm. So when I'm not doing vegetable stuff for my job, I do it for fun. On our farm, because I'm so cool. So on our farm, we also use tarps. And simultaneous to running this project, we also had a couple of tarps going on in different ways on the farm, just kind of noodling with that. And we did put one down when it was too dry. And sure enough, it stayed perfectly dry underneath there. And that 4-week duration in which we were able to eliminate rye in the research plots, because we had actually created proper moisture underneath them. In the dry area where we just put a tarp down, we had complete weed control failures. So you pull that tarp up, and sure enough, it's dry. The weeds have had no reason to germinate, so they haven't, and it's like you never did it. So
yeah, the time capsule that you told me about, I thought that was really helpful, a helpful way to think about it.
It's just worth mentioning, and this wasn't part of that research project. This was, again, the side questing. But we are using tarps with tillage on the farm. And we're using them as just a way to germinate weed seeds prior to those small seeded crops that I was mentioning. So that advice that I'm giving to everybody else, I was like, why aren't we doing this too? Like, this makes sense. So, we do use tarps for about 4 weeks prior to carrots, beets, small seeded things, and things that are going to be in for a long time that we would like to reduce our weed control issues with. So we'll actually, do our regular tillage and form raised beds and then tarp over the top of that. And basically we'll uncover beds as we need them. So that time capsule effect is always there, and you can just uncover what you need, plant it, and just keep going. And that's been fantastic, like really good. So don't think that you can only use tarps for no-till. They're also fantastic when you are doing some tillage.
Yeah, and perfect for like big gardens too. I think that's really good advice. Well, it's a perfect lead into my needs, which is I am doing tillage, and I actually am working. I'm working on a research facility, so I had them prepare a whole acre of vegetables for me, and I'm kind of splitting my acre into quarters. So I have 4 different experiments going on, and this is on a quarter acre. So I had them prepare beds the same that they would for black plastic. However, I left them bare, and I'm playing around with tarping. But it sounds like I made a little bit of a mistake, because we didn't have a lot of moisture, but I was like, you go to war with the army you have. And I covered it up, and since then it has rained like almost every day.
Yeah.
So I wonder, what should I be looking for to kind of abandon the plots that I am using and switch over to, because I looked at it today and I do see little weeds popping up from the uncovered spot. So do you think I should abandon ship and move over to that plot, or what's your best advice for me?
I would peek under the tarp and
Mm-hmm.
see what's happening. If you have equal germination under the tarp as on the open ground, then you're okay and you actually had enough moisture because it's hard to know. So, just peek under there. If there's nothing germinating, then yeah, I would probably, and I don't think of it as abandoning. I think of it as pivoting. We've done this. You have to be flexible sometimes. So I would pivot your tarp over to that next section, let the other section get rained on, and then you can pivot back that
Yeah,
direction. So all is not lost. Those beds will be perfectly happy.
I think that's what I'm gonna do because, well, yeah, I'm running out of time because my next question for you is what I'm planning on planting in these is direct seeding peanut.
Take you very
so,
seriously, yes.
so the one thing I know about peanut, no matter where it is it's like quite difficult to get it to germinate, and I think that has to do with heat and moisture. So the plots have been tilled. They're nice and moist. I'm starting to see little things germinating. So I'm going to move my tarps over to smother the germinating weed seeds, give it like a week or so. And then I'm going to uncover, plant my peanuts, and then recover for a few days to let that peanut germinate. What do you think? Am I playing with fire? Do you have any advice for me?
I see more issues with that 1 week than I do with the peanut idea.
I need more
So,
time.
well, it depends on what weeds you have. The blanket recommendation that we make for all weed control is 4 weeks. Sometimes a little bit more if you've got perennials, but that would actually be dealing with things that have rhizomes, so perennials that have come from some
Okay.
sort of rootstock. If you're just dealing with anything from seed, a week will take care of a lot of things, like your brassica seedlings will not be dead, but they will be, stretched enough that they will die when the sun hits them, which is always a little bit scary to explain to people because they'll pull up the tarp and be like, "Oh my God, there's living weeds everywhere," and they are technically alive, but they can't recover. Kind of like if you leave things in a germination chamber a day too long, and then you're like, "Oh, we'll be fine," and then they'll die like 2 days later.
Oh,
Yeah.
so we're looking for like that thready, etiolated, as long as they
Yes.
look like they wouldn't. Okay, that's good
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah. Some things take longer to germinate, but if you've already had the beds made for a while, that actually works in your favor because things are germinating already. They've started to do their thing, and so a week should get you there. But you're living a little bit on the edge with that piece. That piece to me is a little bit scary.
Okay,
I would always want to give myself at least 2 weeks if I
at least two
could,
weeks.
but life isn't always perfect. So, and if
Well,
you consider that you're going to recover when you put the peanuts in, you could get to another couple of weeks. I don't know how long peanuts take to germinate, but I like your idea of recovering
yeah,
as long as you're not going on a trip or something and
I'm not
like
going on
smother
a
all your
trip.
peanuts.
And also, I do have sensors, so I'm measuring soil moisture. I'm measuring heat, so I can use information I have about how long it takes to germinate peanut based on temperature, so I can play a little fast and loose. Okay, so I'm definitely going to extend to at least 2 weeks. I'm going to plant my peanuts. I'm going to cover, maybe give it another week after that, depending on what the temperatures are underneath there. I'm going to be able to compare and contrast. I'm going to keep at least one plot uncovered so I can look at germination rates between the different plots and the different temperatures they get. But I think that's really good advice because I definitely don't have any rhizomatous weeds to care about. It's very well tended plots, so I think the seed bank is pretty slim.
Nice. That's
So I'm in
amazing.
I'm in great shape. I think I have a good plan.
Yeah, I love it. I'm
Yeah.
excited.
Well, I'll send
I'm
you pictures.
yeah, I'm completely in the dark about peanuts, but I look forward to learning.
Well, the reason that I'm doing it, and maybe you'll have some more thoughts for me here, is not necessarily because I'm wanting people to grow peanuts, and I'm not trying to encourage people to grow peanuts. However, there are some folks who are looking at this in northern climates, so some folks in Massachusetts and Vermont that will transplant peanut. Germination is the trickiest part in cool soils because we don't have seasons that are quite long enough. Part of the reason I'm doing it is I'm really excited about leguminous crops right now. So I'm looking at snap bean, dry bean, maybe even some of these like legumes we use for soil building practices as a background for a trap crop for bugs.
Yeah.
So my background is in insect behavior and behavioral controls, and I've done a lot of work in trap cropping. So you're planting a crop that the bugs prefer, and you're creating these aggregations on this vegetable crop. But once you make an aggregation, like that crop is nailed, it almost always turns into a sacrificial crop. So I'm wondering, like, if there are areas on the farm that you're going to sacrifice, maybe it's just a green manure. Maybe it's, like I'm calling it a Hail Mary crop in the peanut case, which is like, maybe you don't have enough time to grow a peanut and harvest it. Maybe you do. So that's why I'm playing around with it. So I'm using lures, like different floral components. I have a couple different lures I'm using to trap tarnished plant bug, striped cucumber beetle, spotted cucumber beetle. I'm also looking at non-target effects. So some of the lures might be attractive to bees, which we don't want. Attract the pests and not the bees. That's the goal. From your experience, like, does that sound like something that would fit into the systems of the growers that you work with? Like having a place on the farm that could be a trap crop?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Growers are constantly looking for a way to successfully trap crop. Whether it's the sacrificial Hubbard squash or, I've never heard of the sacrificial peanut, but I like it. I mean, radishes are always a bit of a sacrificial crop.
Yeah.
So, yeah, knowing that there will be an area where pests aggregate, where you can either choose to control them or just choose to have them hopefully not reproduce, but sometimes that's how it goes. Yeah, I think that is very much attractive. And anybody that's grown brassicas and put radishes next to broccoli knows that this works. I mean, it's impressive.
Crystal mentioned leaving tarps in place for at least 4 weeks for situations where you have rhizomatous weeds. And I am pretty sure that I do not have rhizomatous weeds in my research plots. I'm familiar with this land. But you may be interested in tarping specifically because you have rhizomatous weeds. Or you might be saying to yourself right now, what is a rhizomatous weed? Well, it's weeds that make things much, much worse if you are relying on mechanical cultivation for your weed management, because chopping them up inadvertently propagates dozens of new plants in the process. So if you're chopping up the roots, it's just turning into a lot of new plants. So here are the top 5 rhizomatous weeds that affect vegetable production in the Northeast. These are the ones that traditional tillage only makes worse if you have them, and you may want to consider an approach like continuous tarping. I borrowed some photos from a few helpful extension resources, so find the link to those in the notes below. Quackgrass, if you look very closely where the leaf blade meets the stem, quackgrass features a pair of small claw-like appendages. They call these auricles, like ear. If you pull up the root, you will find long, aggressive, white or cream-colored rhizomes with incredibly sharp, pointed tips. These roots can actually grow right through our root crop. So you can see that quackgrass can be a real problem if you're growing potatoes, carrots, onions, things like that. Yellow nutsedge. While this looks like a grass, it's technically a sedge. Do remember that sedges have edges. So if you roll the blade of this grass around in your hand, you will feel that it is distinctly triangular and not round like a grass. Nutsedges really stand out as having really strong blades that poke right through black plastic mulch. That is a dead giveaway in most vegetable systems that you have a nutsedge problem, is it's poking right through those beds right after they've been laid. Canada thistle. I don't think it's hard to identify a thistle. The leaves are very dangerous. If you've ever pulled these up by hand, it's very easy to identify Canada thistle. Mugwort, sometimes called chrysanthemum weed. Mugwort is kind of easy to identify using a crush test. You can smell a distinct sage-like or herbal aroma from mugwort. That's another thing that makes mugwort stand out, is that there's some allelopathic effects of this weed, that it puts out chemicals into the soil that can and kind of encroach on plants that way. Also, look for a silvery white fuzzy underside contrasted against the dark green top to identify mugwort from other, lobular looking leaves. Bindweeds, hedge bindweed, field bindweed, you will notice that the mature leaves have an arrowhead shape to them. When they are younger, they're kind of round and they'll grow into that arrowhead shaped leaf, and the flowers are very distinct, easy to identify. Take a look at the extension resources to confirm that these are the weeds that are causing your problems. And let me know if you're trying tarping this year, or your tarping journey, because it sounds like a lot of these more difficult to control weeds, it's not just one and done. It's kind of many years of staying vigilant to control these. So I wish you luck and let me know how it's going.